Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. If you're new to the program, please take a minute now to subscribe to World Affairs in Context on Substack or on Patreon. You will find the links to both of those platforms in the video description below. As we all know, YouTube is not too reliable, so it is nice to have alternative platforms where we can connect. Now, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is on his way to Beijing, and this is not just another routine diplomatic visit. He is traveling at the head of a major economic delegation. According to Politico, in Berlin and in Brussels as well, there is a sense that this trip could be pivotal, maybe even decisive, because right now, as the relationship between Europe and the United States grows more strained, China is no longer just an important market. It is becoming something closer to a strategic necessity. And you may recall that just a couple of years ago, Germany was promoting the idea of economic decoupling from Beijing. Remember that? Well, now, amid Germany's profound economic decline and its deindustrialization, the reality must be finally setting in. Following PM Carney's and then PM Starmer's examples, now Chancellor Merz is set to visit China in hopes of a strategic re-engagement. For many decades, the Transatlantic partnership defined Europe's economic and geopolitical orientation, but today that certainty is very clearly fading. In fact, one could argue that it has faded. Trade tensions, tariff threats, diverging strategic priorities, all of those things have pushed European leaders to reassess their options. European industry is under pressure. Germany's export-driven economy, especially its auto sector, which has been the backbone of its economy for many decades, is facing structural decline in key markets in Europe as well as abroad, including in China itself. And at the same time, access to the American market is no longer something that Europe feels it can take for granted. So Merz is starting to look at China through a more of a practical lens. And he's probably thinking that Europe needs strategic raw materials, it needs stable supply chains, and it does need better access to the Chinese market. So he's set to travel to China and pursue those goals. But that's not all that he's after in China. But let's focus on the economic aspect first. So Germany requires growth because as the EU is set to militarize, as I frequently mention in my videos, it can't achieve those goals without a stable economy. So again, the reality is setting in, and this is a perfect example of that. In Beijing, Merz is likely going to push China to open the market more fully to European, especially to German goods. And if sale opportunities in the United States shrink because of tariffs or political friction with the Trump administration, Europe needs alternatives, and China is an excellent one. But this trip is about more than just economics, of course. Looming over every conversation in Beijing will be the conflict in Ukraine. And this is where it gets really interesting. Merz intends to press China on its relationship with Moscow. Western strategy toward BRICS countries increasingly centers on limiting, and many of you may have noticed this, it centers on limiting their alignment with Russia, or at least preventing deeper cooperation that could blunt sanctions and Western leverage. Whether that strategy has worked is another story, of course, but nevertheless, that is one of the key aspects, one of the key tools. Together with French President Macron, Merz has pushed for ambitious trade agreements with India and with Brazil, and the idea is very clear here. It is to engage the emerging powers individually to strengthen bilateral ties, and in doing so, to prevent BRICS from functioning as a unified geopolitical actor, as a unified geopolitical counterweight to the West. So it is very much divide and conquer. So far, results have been quite mixed, and of course, BRICS has not fractured. If anything, it appears more self-confident, and it appears to be more assertive. Now, this quiet reality will follow Merz into the Great Hall of the People in Beijing, because Beijing understands the broader strategic picture just as clearly as Berlin does. At the heart of Merz's approach here is a bigger ambition, of course. He wants Europe to act as an independent strategic pole in the world that is no longer unipolar, and that means, if necessary, putting cautious distance between Europe and Washington. Now, hear me out. He doesn't want to break the alliance because he can't afford to do that, but he may want to redefine it somewhat. And in a recent speech, for example, he warned the United States against escalating tariff wars. He made it clear that if Americans choose to use trade policy as a geopolitical weapon, that's their decision, but Europe will not automatically follow. Now, as I've said earlier, it is fair to be very skeptical of his rhetoric, but nevertheless, that has been his message over the course of the past several days. And it is a remarkable statement to make when you consider how central the Transatlantic alliance has been for Germany for decades. At the same time, and this is where it gets even more interesting, at the same time, Merz still believes, as do many European leaders, the majority actually, that the West should remain the architect of a rules-based liberal order. Not out of nostalgia, of course, he's doing this, but because he and many other European leaders genuinely see it as stabilizing and as preferable to great power competition. Nobody wants to give up their power, naturally. But the challenge here is that the rest of the world may not see it in the same way, and it doesn't. In China, the mood is very different. Unlike India, which often balances between major powers, Beijing doesn't quite feel that it needs to court Europe. It doesn't feel that way, and we see that over and over again. China's economy is massive. Its political leadership sees itself as shaping, not exactly adapting to the emerging multilateral order, to the emerging multipolar order. And according to many sources, there is growing irritation in Beijing about what is perceived as European moralizing or its strategic inconsistency. Merz himself, as an example of that, Merz himself has criticized China's military, quote-unquote, expansion in South China Sea, while at the same time, while simultaneously seeking deeper economic cooperation with Beijing. And so that dual message, partnership on trade, criticism on security, reflects Europe's internal tension. It wants access to China's market, but of course it wants China's investment, but it also wants to maintain alignment with Western security concerns and Western security interests. The question here is whether China sees Europe as a serious strategic actor or as a divided, weakened, and a fractured bloc that still depends on American security guarantees. Because this strip isn't just about what Merz feels he can or want to demand from Beijing. This is about what he truly understands. Does he recognize that the center of gravity in global politics is shifting toward Asia and away from the West? Does he know that? Is he able to acknowledge that? And that economic growth, technological innovation, and strategic initiatives are increasingly concentrated outside the traditional Western core. And if he does recognize those things, is Europe ready to adapt? Is Germany ready to adapt? Merz has framed this moment in terms of strategic partnerships. What's important here, in my personal view, is the following. Merz may arrive in Beijing with a detailed agenda, such as trade access, supply chains, Ukraine, strategic dialogue, but what may matter more is whether he leaves with a clearer understanding of where Europe truly stands in the new global hierarchy. Because the era when Europe could assume centrality is over. And if Europe wants to remain relevant, it may need to do more than just demand concessions from China. Let me know what your thoughts are on this topic. As always, I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for being here with me. Please consider supporting my work. I appreciate every single one of you who has become a paid subscriber. Like, subscribe, and share otherwise. And I will see you back here tomorrow. Take care.